I never imagined that something as simple as a weekend visit could change my daughter's life so quickly and so completely. She was only 7 years old when she suddenly stopped eating, and it happened right after she spent a few days with my mother. I still remember the way her small hands pushed her plate away that night, how she stared down at the food like it was something terrifying, something that could physically hurt her. That moment became the beginning of everything that followed, a nightmare that would unfold slowly, painfully, over the weeks and months to come. It was the first crack in what I thought was a safe, warm world for my little girl. Looking back now, I can see that crack more clearly, can trace its jagged edges through every conversation, every meal, every sleepless night that came after. Before all this happened, mealtime had always been one of the sweetest, most cherished parts of our day together. She loved mac and cheese with the creamy sauce that I made from scratch, fresh strawberries that she'd eat one at a time while making silly faces, little peanut butter sandwiches that I'd cut into heart shapes with a cookie cutter, and warm chicken soup with alphabet noodles when it rained outside. She was never what anyone would call a picky eater. In fact, she was the opposite adventurous, curious about new foods, always willing to try at least one bite of whatever I put in front of her. She'd giggle when she'd take that first bite of something she loved, and I'd always tease her about how she stuffed her cheeks like a little chipmunk storing nuts for winter. Those tiny, ordinary moments were how I measured our happiness as a family. They were the currency of love in our household. We were a tight-knit family living in the quiet suburbs of Ohio, in a modest 2-story house with a backyard where she'd play until the streetlights came on. Life was calm, structured, and predictable, which is exactly what I thought a child needed to feel safe and secure in the world. Her grandmother, my mother, lived about an hour away in a small ranch-style home she'd owned for decades. She wasn't just an occasional visitor in our lives. She was woven into the fabric of our routine, part of the normal rhythm of our weeks. Most weekends, especially when the weather was nice, we'd pack up a little overnight bag with her favorite pajamas, the ones with the pink unicorns, and a well-loved stuffed bunny she'd named Mister, Whiskers, and we'd drive her over to Grandma's house for a sleepover. My mom would bake chocolate chip cookies from a recipe that had been in our family for generations, tell her stories about when I was a little girl, and let her stay up just a little later than usual to watch cartoons. At least, that's what I believed was happening during those visits. I thought she was happy there, that she looked forward to those weekends as much as my mother did. I trusted my mother the way a daughter is supposed to trust the woman who raised her. I didn't question it, not even once. Why would I? This was my mother, the woman who had taken care of me, who had nursed me through childhood illnesses, who had taught me how to braid my hair and bake a pie. I never imagined she could be capable of hurting my child. The last visit started like any other weekend before it. It was early spring, and the air outside still carried that hint of winter chill that makes you pull your jacket a little tighter. The trees were just beginning to bud, tiny green promises of warmer days ahead. My daughter was excited to go, genuinely excited. She'd been talking about the visit all week long, counting down the days on her little calendar with colorful markers. She wanted to wear her favorite purple sweater, the one with the little embroidered stars on the sleeves that caught the light when she moved. And she carried Mister, Whiskers tucked under her arm like always, his floppy ears dragging slightly on the ground as she walked. I kissed her goodbye at my mom's front door, breathing in the sweet smell of her shampoo one more time before letting her go. She waved back at me with the brightest smile, her gap-toothed grin lighting up her whole face, and I drove away feeling content, feeling like everything in my world was exactly as it should be. I never thought that the same child who skipped through that doorway would return home, changed, quiet, and frightened of something I couldn't see or understand. When I picked her up 2 days later, on a Sunday afternoon that should have been ordinary, I noticed the difference almost immediately. The change was subtle at first, but unmistakable to someone who knew her as well as I did. She wasn't bouncing toward me the way she usually did when I came to pick her up. She didn't run into my arms with stories spilling out of her mouth about everything she and Grandma had done together. Instead, she walked slowly, deliberately, clutching Mr. Whiskers like she was afraid someone might try to take him away from her. Her eyes looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. There was something haunted in them, something that made my stomach twist with unease. There was a kind of stiffness in her small body that I didn't understand at first, like she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. I told myself maybe she was just tired. Maybe it had been a busy weekend, filled with activities and late bedtimes. I didn't want to believe anything else. I needed it to be something simple, something that would fix itself with a good night's sleep in her own bed. The real shock came at dinner that first night back home. I made her favorite meal, the one she always requested for special occasions, creamy mac and cheese with little bits of ham mixed in, the kind she used to beg for every single week. I even used the special shaped pasta she loved, the ones that looked like little shells. She sat down at the table like she always did, in her usual spot with the booster seat we hadn't quite gotten rid of yet, but she didn't touch her fork. It sat there beside her plate, untouched, while she stared down at the food as if the very sight of it made her uncomfortable, maybe even nauseous. I remember the way my chest tightened, the way my breath caught in my throat. At first, I thought she might be coming down with something, a stomach bug maybe, or the flu that had been going around her school. I even put my hand on her forehead to check for fever, pressing my palm against her skin the way my mother used to do with me. But she wasn't hot. She wasn't sick. At least not in any way I could identify with touch. She was just scared. Terrified, actually, though I didn't want to use that word yet. I tried coaxing her gently, the way mothers do when they sense something is wrong but don't want to make it worse by pushing too hard. I used my softest voice, the one I reserved for bedtime stories and scraped knees. I told her she didn't have to eat everything on her plate, that she could just have a bite or two. She shook her head, her hair falling forward to hide her face. I told her I could make something else, anything she wanted, even if it was just toast with butter or a bowl of cereal. She didn't answer. She didn't even look at me. I didn't want to push too hard, didn't want to turn dinner into a battle that would make everything worse. She had never done anything like this before in her entire 7 years of life, and part of me thought it would just pass on its own. Kids have phases, right? Maybe this was one of them, some developmental milestone I'd read about in parenting books but had never actually experienced. I couldn't have been more wrong about that assumption. That night when I tucked her into bed, she was quiet in a way that felt wrong. Too quiet. The silence was heavy, oppressive, filling her small bedroom like a physical presence. Usually, she'd ask me to read a story, or she'd chatter away telling me about her day in exhaustive detail, sharing every tiny moment she'd experienced. This time, she just held on to Mr. Whiskers with both arms wrapped around him, facing the wall with her back to me. It was like a light inside her had dimmed, or maybe even gone out completely. I kissed her forehead, feeling the warmth of her skin against my lips, turned off the lamp on her nightstand, and stood there in the doorway for a moment longer than usual, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that was crawling up my spine like cold fingers. Something was wrong. I didn't know what yet, but I could feel it in my bones, in that primal way mothers sense danger to their children. The next day brought no improvement. In fact, things got measurably worse. She didn't eat breakfast, not even a bite of the cinnamon toast I made, her usual favorite. She didn't eat lunch, pushing away the sandwich I'd carefully prepared with the crust cut off just the way she liked. She didn't even want a cookie from the jar on the counter, and that was something I never thought I'd see. Cookies had always been her weakness, her treat, the thing she'd sneak if I wasn't watching carefully enough. I started to panic, but I didn't want to let her see it. I knew that kids could sense their parents' fear, that it could make everything worse. So I kept my voice calm and my face neutral, even as my heart raced. I asked her gently, carefully, if something had happened at Grandma's house. She didn't answer. She wouldn't even meet my eyes. She just hugged Mister, whiskers tighter, as if that stuffed animal was the only thing in the entire world keeping her safe from some unnamed danger. I called my mother later that day, after my daughter had retreated to her room to play quietly, or rather, to sit quietly, since she wasn't really playing anymore. I asked if something unusual had happened during the visit, trying to keep my voice casual, not wanting to sound accusatory. My mother sounded surprised at the question, almost annoyed that I was even asking. Her voice had that edge to it, that tone I remembered from my childhood when I'd questioned her authority or her decisions. She told me everything had been fine, perfectly normal, that they'd baked cookies together, gone for a walk around the neighborhood, watched her favorite cartoons, and laughed together. She painted a picture of a perfect weekend, idyllic and sweet. I wanted to believe her with every fiber of my being. This was my mother, after all. She raised me, dealt with my moods and phases, taught me everything I knew about being a parent. She loved my daughter, or at least, I thought she did. At least, that's what I desperately needed to believe in that moment. As the days went on, blurring together in a haze of worry and sleepless nights, her refusal to eat grew more intense, more disturbing. It wasn't just about skipping meals anymore, about being stubborn or testing boundaries. She flinched at the sight of food as if it might attack her. Her shoulders would stiffen visibly, pulling up toward her ears, and sometimes her little hands would tremble when I placed a plate in front of her, shaking like leaves in a storm. I tried everything I could think of, her favorite snacks arranged artfully on her favorite plate, new recipes I found online that were supposed to appeal to picky eaters, even letting her help me in the kitchen, thinking that involvement in the preparation might make her more willing to eat. Nothing worked. Not a single thing made any difference. And with each passing day, I watched her growing thinner, paler, and quieter, fading before my eyes like a photograph left too long in the sun. It felt like she was slipping away from me, and I had no idea why or how to stop it from happening. We visited her pediatrician, Dr. Martinez, who had been seeing her since she was born. I sat in that familiar office with its cheerful wall decorations and toys in the corner, hoping desperately for answers. Dr. Martinez was kind and thorough, asking questions, examining her carefully. She suggested it might be stress, maybe something happening at school, bullying perhaps, or problems with a teacher. They ran blood tests to check for deficiencies, examined her throat for infections, asked about changes in our household routine. But everything came back completely normal. There was no medical explanation for why my little girl, who once loved mealtime so much that she'd help me set the table just so dinner would come faster, now treated food like it was something dangerous, something that could hurt her. I felt helpless sitting in that doctor's office, watching Dr. Martinez's face as she searched for answers that weren't in any test results. I wanted someone to give me a clear diagnosis, a treatment plan, something concrete I could fight against. But all I got were theories that didn't fit what I was seeing at home, suggestions that felt hollow and useless. I tried to talk to her father about it, sitting down with him after she'd gone to bed one night. He thought maybe she was just being stubborn, going through a phase of testing boundaries. He didn't see how serious it was, didn't understand the gravity of what was happening. He told me to give it time, to stop hovering, to let her come around on her own. He said I was making too big a deal out of it, that my worry was probably making her more anxious. But he wasn't the one sitting at the table with her 3 times a day, watching the light fade from her eyes a little more with each untouched meal. He wasn't the one who saw how her clothes were starting to hang loose on her small frame, how her face was becoming gaunt, how dark circles were forming under her eyes. I knew this wasn't just a phase or a power struggle. Something had happened to her, something real and traumatic, and it all started after she visited my mother. The nights became the hardest part of each day. I'd lie awake in the dark, listening to the quiet sounds of the house settling, my thoughts circling the same questions over and over like water going down a drain. What happened at Grandma's house? Why wouldn't she talk about it? Was it something I missed? Some sign I should have seen sooner? Some red flag I'd ignored because I didn't want to believe my own mother could be part of the problem? The guilt pressed down on me like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe. I felt like I was failing her in the most fundamental way a mother can fail her child. I should have known how to fix this. I should have been able to protect her. I should have understood what was happening before it got this bad. I even tried sitting her on my lap one evening, holding her close while I whispered to her about how safe she was at home, how much I loved her, how nothing bad could happen here, how I would always protect her no matter what. I wrapped my arms around her small body and felt how much lighter she'd become, how fragile. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She didn't react at all, really. She just stared at the wall with this faraway look that scared me more than anything else ever had in my entire life. It was like she was there physically, but somewhere else entirely in her mind. Somewhere I couldn't reach, no matter how hard I tried. One evening, about 2 weeks after that fateful visit, I decided to take her back to my mother's house, thinking maybe facing the place again would help somehow. Maybe being there would trigger her memory, would help her open up about what happened. Maybe seeing that it was just a normal house, that there was nothing to be afraid of, would help her heal. The moment we pulled into the familiar driveway, before I'd even put the car in park, I noticed the way her little fingers dug into the car seat, gripping the fabric so hard her knuckles turned white. She refused to get out of the car, pressing herself back against the seat as if trying to disappear into it. She looked terrified, not upset, not anxious, but genuinely terrified in a way that made my blood run cold. That's when the knot in my stomach, the one that had been there for weeks, turned into something sharper, something darker, something I couldn't ignore anymore. My mother came out onto the porch smiling, waving at her granddaughter with that same cheerful expression she always had, but my daughter wouldn't even look at her. She turned her face away, pressing her cheek hard against the car door, making herself as small as possible. It was a visceral, physical rejection that no child that age could fake. I tried to make sense of it, tried to find some rational explanation. This was her grandmother, the same woman who had sung her lullabies when she was a baby, who had held her when she'd scraped her knees learning to ride her bike, who had attended every birthday party and holiday celebration. What could possibly have happened to make her react like this? My mother brushed it off when I mentioned her reaction, saying she was just moody or tired, that kids were unpredictable at this age. But I saw the panic in my daughter's eyes, and that wasn't tiredness or moodiness. That was pure, primal fear. That was the look of someone who'd been hurt and was desperately trying to avoid being hurt again. I started replaying everything in my head, lying awake at night, going through memories like files in a cabinet. I thought about the way my mom used to be with me when I was young. She was strict, very strict, actually, but I'd always believed she had softened with age, that becoming a grandmother had mellowed her the way it does with so many people. She'd always said she loved being a grandmother, that it was different from being a parent, easier and more fun. She loved baking, telling stories, spending time with my daughter. That image was so hard to break, so deeply ingrained in how I understood our family dynamics. I didn't want to believe she could hurt my child in any way. But then again, something was clearly, undeniably wrong. My child's fear wasn't imaginary or manufactured. Kids don't just stop eating for no reason. They don't shrink away from people they love without cause. I spent the next few days watching her even more closely than before, trying to find any clue in her behavior, any piece of the puzzle that might help me understand. She'd flinch when I opened the refrigerator, the sound of the door making her jump. She'd cover her mouth when she smelled food cooking, as if the scent itself made her nauseous. She even started avoiding the kitchen altogether, going the long way through the living room to get upstairs rather than walk past where we prepared meals. Every little thing she did felt like a puzzle piece, but none of them fit together yet into a picture I could understand. I was missing something crucial, something that would make all of this make sense. My own mother's voice on the phone started to sound different to me during this time. The way she dismissed my worries made me increasingly uneasy with each conversation. She kept saying things like, "She's just being dramatic," or "You're spoiling her," or "Kids need discipline, not coddling." I wanted to scream at her that this wasn't drama, that my little girl wasn't pretending, that something was genuinely wrong. But I kept my voice calm, kept my tone measured, afraid that pushing too hard would make her shut down completely, would make her defensive, would prevent me from getting any real information about what had happened during that visit. There was one night that nearly broke me completely, that brought me as close to total despair as I've ever been. I sat on the kitchen floor after she had gone to bed, holding an untouched plate of spaghetti I'd made for dinner, her second favorite meal, something I'd hoped might tempt her. I just sat there on the cold tile floor, my back against the cabinet, and cried quietly because I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't force her to eat without traumatizing her further. I couldn't ignore what was happening and hope it would resolve itself. And I couldn't bring myself to fully believe that my own mother might be involved in something that hurt her granddaughter so deeply. The cognitive dissonance was tearing me apart. That's when I realized this wasn't just about food anymore. This was about trust, about the fundamental betrayal of trust that forms the foundation of family relationships. Something had happened at my mother's house, something significant enough to change my daughter overnight. And if I didn't find out what it was, if I didn't get to the bottom of this mystery, I was going to lose her to whatever invisible fear she was carrying inside her. I was going to watch my daughter fade away, and I would never forgive myself for not fighting harder to save her. This is why I'm sharing my story with you now. I need you to listen. I need you to understand. Please listen to my story and tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong, because my mother's betrayal didn't just make my daughter stop eating, it made me choose between protecting my child and keeping my own mother in my life. And that choice, that impossible, heartbreaking choice, was only the beginning. As the days turned into weeks, the urgency grew heavier with each sunrise. Every skipped meal felt like another step closer to something irreversible, something I might not be able to undo. Her tiny body was losing weight at an alarming rate, dropping pounds she couldn't afford to lose. Her energy was fading visibly. She stopped running, stopped playing, stopped doing all the normal things 7-year-olds do. I tried everything I could think of, more pediatricians, nutritionists who specialized in childhood eating disorders, gentle encouragement, stern talks, even letting her choose her own food at the grocery store, hoping that control over her choices might make a difference. Nothing worked. Not a single intervention made any impact. It was like she had built an impenetrable wall between herself and anything that reminded her of what happened. And I still didn't know what that was. I still didn't have the full picture. My friends told me not to overthink it when I confided in them during play dates or phone calls. They meant well. I know they did. They said maybe she was just going through a phase, that kids were unpredictable, that she'd grow out of it. But a phase doesn't make a child tremble when they see a plate of food. A phase doesn't make a child shrink away from their own grandmother with terror in their eyes. A phase doesn't result in significant weight loss and social withdrawal. I knew, deep down in my gut, this wasn't something that would fix itself. I was the only one who could get to the bottom of it. But that meant looking into something I wasn't ready to face, something that would fundamentally change how I understood my own family history. I started going over small details from that weekend visit obsessively, like rewinding a film and examining each frame. My mom had told me they'd bake cookies. What kind? Chocolate chip, she said. They'd gone on a walk where? Around the block, nothing special. They'd watched TV. What shows? The usual cartoons my daughter liked. I tried to imagine each moment, to see it through my daughter's eyes, to understand what could have gone so terribly wrong. Something about the way my mom had mentioned dinner during one of our phone calls stuck with me like a burr. She'd said, almost offhandedly, trying to sound casual, she was being a little difficult about her dinner, but you know how kids are. It hadn't sounded strange at the time, just a passing comment. But now, analyzing it with fresh eyes, it did sound strange. Very strange. What did difficult mean? What had happened at that dinner table? I thought about calling my mom again to ask more detailed questions, to dig deeper into what she meant, but I knew she'd just brush it off the way she had every other time. I thought about asking my daughter again, trying different approaches, but every time I even began to broach the subject, she would shut down completely, going silent and still like a scared animal. It was like the words themselves scared her more than I could comprehend. I began to feel like I was standing on the edge of something dark and deep, something that was waiting for me to step forward and face it, even though every instinct told me I didn't want to know the truth. Her school called one day, and my heart sank the moment I saw the number on my phone screen. The teacher, Mrs. Henderson, asked if everything was okay at home, with a careful gentleness that told me this was a serious call. They'd noticed she wasn't eating lunch anymore, wasn't even opening her lunchbox. Other kids had started commenting on it, asking her why she never ate. That was when the reality of how serious this situation truly was hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just at home anymore. It wasn't contained to our dinner table, to the meals I prepared. It was everywhere. This fear was living inside her now, controlling her behavior in every setting, and I couldn't let it grow any bigger or stronger. I wish I could say I handled everything calmly during this period, that I knew exactly what to do, that I was the strong, capable mother I'd always imagined I would be in a crisis. But the truth is, I was terrified every single day. I was terrified of what I didn't know, of the gaps in the story that I couldn't fill. I was terrified of the possibility that the person I trusted most in the world, my own mother, had done something that changed my child forever. I was terrified of being right about my suspicions, because being right would mean facing something unthinkable. That night I sat by her bedside after she'd finally fallen asleep, watching her small chest rise and fall with each breath. She looked so peaceful when she slept, so normal, like everything was fine. But I knew better. I made a promise to myself there in the dark, sitting in the wooden chair beside her bed that creaked when I shifted my weight. I was going to find out what happened during that visit. I didn't care what it took or how much it hurt me personally. I didn't care if it destroyed my relationship with my mother forever. My little girl deserved to feel safe again. She deserved to smile when she saw food, to run into her grandmother's arms without fear, to just be a child living a normal childhood. And if the price of that was facing something I desperately didn't want to face, then so be it. I would pay that price gladly. I had no idea then just how deep this wound would go, how far down the rabbit hole I would have to travel. I didn't know how much it would break me to discover the truth, but I knew this was just the beginning of a journey I had to take. Something happened during that visit, something terrible, and I was going to uncover the truth, no matter what it cost me. The longer it went on, the heavier everything felt, like weights were being added to my chest with each passing hour. Every day I woke up with the same sick feeling in my stomach, the kind that comes from knowing something is terribly wrong, but not having the answers or tools to fix it. I'd walk past her empty plate, still sitting on the table, the smell of food that used to make her smile now hanging in the air like a bitter reminder of what we'd lost. I tried so hard to keep things normal for her sake. I packed her lunch for school every morning, even though I knew she wouldn't eat it. I made her favorite snacks and left them where she could reach them. I kept pretending it would just take time to heal. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Time wasn't going to fix this. Not when the cause was still hidden, still festering like an infected wound. Her body was growing visibly thinner with each passing week. It wasn't just the way her clothes started hanging loose on her small frame, or how I had to tighten her belt an extra notch. It was the way she moved slow, careful, like even existing was starting to take too much energy out of her. I started weighing her every week using our bathroom scale, hoping each time that I was wrong, that the number would somehow be better than I feared. But it kept dropping. A pound here, half a pound there. Watching those numbers fall made me feel like I was failing her in real time, like I was watching her disappear and couldn't do anything to stop it. Every doctor I spoke to gave me the same worried but cautious look, the one medical professionals give when they know something is seriously wrong but can't quite figure out what. They told me about eating disorders in young children, about stress responses and trauma reactions, about fear-based avoidance behaviors. They asked endless questions about school, about our home life, about potential bullying or abuse. But every time, I found myself circling back to the same weekend, the same visit, the same house. That was where everything changed. I could feel it in my bones like a certainty, like a knot that wouldn't untangle no matter how hard I pulled at the threads. I tried sitting down with my mother again one evening, calling her when I couldn't sleep at 2 a.m. I asked her more detailed questions, pressing for specific memories, trying to jog something loose. But she only sounded more defensive with each question, her voice taking on that sharp edge I remembered from my childhood when I'd done something wrong. She told me I was overreacting, making mountains out of molehills. She told me that kids sometimes just act out for attention. She told me to stop making such a big deal out of nothing, that I was creating problems where none existed. I could hear the sharpness in her voice, the dismissive tone that made my hands shake as I held the phone. That voice had never scared me before, or at least I'd never let myself acknowledge that it scared me. But that night it did. It made me realize how easily she could turn things around, make me feel like I was the one being dramatic, the one causing problems. She was good at that, always had been. She told me that maybe I wasn't being strict enough as a parent, that maybe my daughter had learned that if she refused food, she'd get attention and special treatment. She suggested I was enabling bad behavior, rewarding it with concern and medical visits. That was the moment something inside me shifted permanently. This wasn't just about misunderstanding anymore, wasn't just about different parenting philosophies. My mother didn't even seem genuinely concerned about her granddaughter's pain or health. She was dismissing it, minimizing it, as if it was some kind of manipulation or act. And maybe she was dismissing it because she knew exactly why it was happening. Maybe she was trying to cover her own tracks. That thought burned through me like a cold fire, chilling me to my core. I didn't want to believe it. Everything in me rebelled against the idea. I didn't want to think that my own mother, the woman who raised me and changed my diapers and taught me to read, could hurt my child in any way. But my daughter's fear wasn't fake or imagined. Kids don't tremble at the sight of food because they want attention. They don't lose dangerous amounts of weight to make a point or manipulate their parents. Something real had happened. Something traumatic. And I couldn't ignore it anymore. Couldn't keep making excuses or giving my mother the benefit of the doubt. I started noticing little signs I hadn't seen before or hadn't let myself see. When I asked my daughter if she wanted dinner, she would press her lips together tightly, like she was physically holding words back, keeping secrets locked inside. She didn't want to talk about food, didn't want to discuss eating, but her body spoke louder than words ever could. She avoided anything that reminded her of Grandma's house with an intensity that couldn't be faked. She didn't want to visit, would start crying if I even suggested it. She didn't want to hear my mother's name, would flinch when someone mentioned Grandma. She didn't want to see the purple sweater Grandma had given her for her birthday. She'd pushed it to the back of her closet, buried under other clothes, like erasing its existence would somehow keep her safe from whatever memories it triggered. Her teachers noticed the change too, and their concerns added another layer to my growing worry. They told me she wasn't eating lunch at school, that she sat quietly at the cafeteria table, staring at her food while other kids ate and talked around her. They said other children were starting to notice and comment, asking her why she never ate anything, and they were worried about the social impact this was having. Hearing this from someone outside our family made it all feel even more real, more urgent. This wasn't just a phase I could wait out. This wasn't something happening only at home that might resolve itself. I wasn't just imagining it or being an overprotective mother. This was taking over every single part of her life, spreading like a stain. I tried everything I could think of to help her, exhausting every option I could research or imagine. I cooked with her in the kitchen, hoping maybe if she helped me make the food, it would make eating it less scary. We made cookies together, and she helped me stir and measure. But when they came out of the oven golden and perfect, she wouldn't try even one. I brought her to her favorite diner, the one where she used to love getting pancakes shaped like animals with chocolate chip eyes. She sat there in the familiar booth, staring at the plate the waitress set down, her hands shaking visibly. She didn't take a single bite, just pushed the food around with her fork until it got cold. I tried letting her pick out anything she wanted from the grocery store, walking up and down every aisle telling her she could choose whatever looked good. She didn't want anything. Not the candy she used to beg for, not the fruit snacks, not even the ice cream she'd once loved. Every attempt ended with me forcing back tears in some parking lot, holding her small body and telling her it would be okay even when I didn't believe it myself anymore. My husband started losing patience during this time too, and the strain on our marriage began to show in ways both big and small. He told me I was turning this into a bigger deal than it needed to be, that I was obsessing over it in an unhealthy way. He said maybe I was projecting my own issues onto the situation. Maybe I was making her more anxious by hovering too much and showing how worried I was. I wanted to scream at him when he said these things. I wanted to grab his shoulders and shake him until he understood. He didn't see what I saw when I looked at her. He wasn't there during the day, wasn't the one watching her shrink into silence at the dinner table, wasn't the one who saw how terrified she looked whenever my mother's name came up in conversation. He didn't understand because he wasn't seeing it. Not really. He came home from work tired and just wanted everything to be normal, wanted to believe this would pass on its own. The distance between us grew in quiet ways that were almost worse than fighting. Small arguments about nothing, cold silences that stretched for hours, nights spent on opposite sides of the bed, both of us exhausted but in completely different ways. He thought I was being emotional and irrational. I thought he wasn't seeing the truth that was right in front of us. And caught in between us, suffering from this disconnect, was our daughter, fading away a little more each day. I went back to the doctor multiple times, desperate for something, anything, that could give me a concrete answer or solution. They suggested therapy for her, that maybe talking to a professional who specialized in childhood trauma could help. They said sometimes children show physical symptoms of trauma before they're able to verbalize or process what happened to them. That word trauma echoed in my chest like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing, loud and insistent. I remember gripping the arms of the chair in that office so hard my knuckles turned white, my mind spinning with implications I didn't want to face. Trauma. That wasn't something that just appeared out of nowhere. It wasn't something that happened for no reason. It meant something specific had happened, something damaging and frightening, and all the signs, every single one of them, pointed to one place, one weekend, one house. The hardest part of all of this was that she wouldn't tell me anything. She wouldn't say a single word about what happened. It was like there was an invisible wall around her, built from fear and secrets, and no matter how gently I approached, no matter how safe I tried to make her feel, that wall wouldn't come down. The more I tried to get close to the truth, the stronger that wall seemed to become, like she was reinforcing it with every attempt I made. I started wondering if something had happened that she was too scared to talk about, something that lived in her nightmares. Or maybe something someone had explicitly told her not to talk about, threatened her not to reveal. I tried to be as gentle as humanly possible with her. I sat with her in quiet moments, in her room surrounded by her stuffed animals and toys. I told her she could tell me anything, absolutely anything, and I would never be angry. I told her she was completely safe now, that nothing bad would happen to her here at home. I told her that if she shared her secrets with me, nothing bad would happen because of it. She just looked at me with those big, empty eyes that used to sparkle with joy and mischief. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She didn't react at all. She just held Mr. Whiskers tighter and tighter, as if that worn stuffed animal was the only thing in the entire world she could still trust completely. One afternoon, when the weight of everything became too much to bear alone, I drove past my mother's house by myself. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just got in the car and drove, pulled by something I couldn't name. I parked across the street and just sat there in my car, staring at the house for what must have been an hour. The white shutters that needed repainting, the trimmed hedges my mother was so proud of, the small porch where I'd grown up playing with dolls and riding my tricycle. It looked so normal from the outside, so harmless, so much like any other house in any other quiet neighborhood. But inside those walls, something had happened to my little girl, something that made her afraid to eat, afraid to live normally. The thought of that made my skin crawl, made me feel physically ill. I tried to remember my childhood there, tried to think through my memories with fresh eyes, looking for anything I had forgotten or repressed. Any hint that this wasn't the safe place I'd always believed it to be. The truth is, my mom wasn't always easy to live with when I was growing up. She was strict, sometimes too strict, the kind of strict that went beyond normal parental boundaries. She believed in tough love, in discipline, in children who obeyed without question. She had rules for everything, and those rules were not negotiable. Growing up in her house, I'd learned very early on that my feelings didn't matter as much as following the rules she'd set. She never hit me, never left bruises or marks, but she knew exactly how to make me feel small with just a look or a single sharp word. She could wither you with her disapproval, make you feel worthless with her tone. I had pushed those memories away for years, decades even, convincing myself that she'd changed as she got older, that becoming a grandmother had softened her the way it does for so many people, melting away the hard edges. But what if it hadn't? What if she was the same person she'd always been, just better at hiding it from me? The idea that she might have treated my daughter the same way she'd treated me was something I desperately didn't want to face. But ignoring it wouldn't save my child. Pretending wouldn't make the problem go away. I needed to know the truth, needed to face it head on, no matter how much it hurt. And if my mother wasn't going to tell me, and my daughter couldn't find the words, then I had to find another way to discover what really happened during that weekend visit. I started noticing my mother's tone more carefully whenever I mentioned the eating issue in our phone conversations. She always brushed it off with the same dismissive attitude, never showing genuine concern or worry. She made it sound like I was weak, like I was raising a soft child who didn't know how to follow rules or handle discipline. That word kept coming up, rules. She always believed kids needed strict discipline, especially around food. She had very specific ideas about meal times, about what children should eat and how much. She thought food shouldn't be wasted under any circumstances, that plates should always be cleaned completely, regardless of how the child felt. I remembered with sudden, painful clarity the way she used to make me sit at the table for hours as a kid until I finished everything on my plate. I remembered how my stomach would hurt, cramping and aching, how I would feel sick and nauseous, but still be forced to keep eating. I remembered crying at that table, begging to be excused, and being told no. It was something I had buried deep in my memory, something I'd sworn to myself I'd never do to my own child when I became a mother. That night, the memory came back to me like a slap to the face, sharp and stinging. What if she had done the exact same thing to my daughter? What if she'd forced her to sit at that table, forced her to eat past the point of comfort, past the point of fullness, until eating itself became associated with pain and fear. That thought made my hands shake uncontrollably. I went through every conversation we'd had in my head, every small clue, every tiny shift in my daughter's behavior, and it all lined up in a way that made horrible, perfect sense. She wasn't afraid of food itself. She was afraid of what food meant. She was afraid of being forced, of being controlled, of being hurt through the act of eating. And my mother was at the center of it all, the spider in this terrible web. I decided in that moment that I couldn't keep waiting for the truth to somehow reveal itself. I had to go after it actively. I had to take control of this situation before I lost my daughter entirely. I didn't want to corner her or make her feel more unsafe than she already did, but I needed to know what was happening, what had happened. I needed proof of what I suspected was true. That was when I made a decision that would change everything, that would bring the truth into the light, no matter how ugly it turned out to be. I decided to install a small, hidden camera in my mother's dining room the next time I took my daughter there for a visit. It wasn't something I ever imagined I would do, something I ever thought I'd be capable of. It felt invasive, felt wrong, felt like a violation of privacy and trust. But at that point, my daughter's health was slipping through my fingers like sand, and I had no choice but to do something drastic, something that might finally show me the truth I needed to see. I told myself over and over that this wasn't about revenge or anger. It wasn't about catching my mother doing something wrong. It was purely about protection, about saving my child from whatever was destroying her from the inside out. I didn't tell my mother about the camera, of course. I bought a small one online, the kind that looks like a regular object, and carefully installed it on a shelf where it could capture the dining table. I arranged for another visit, though it nearly broke my heart to do it, to knowingly send my daughter back to a place where she'd been hurt. I reassured her gently, as soothingly as I could manage, telling her I'd be nearby the whole time, that she was safe. She didn't want to go. Of course she didn't. She clung to me at my mother's doorway, her small arms wrapped around my waist, not saying anything but pressing her face against me. I promised her she was safe, that nothing bad would happen this time. It was the hardest promise I've ever made in my life, because at that moment I wasn't entirely sure if it was true. I was gambling with my daughter's well-being, but I needed to know. While she was there, I couldn't focus on anything else. I sat in my car, parked not far away, my phone in my hand, feeling like my heart was lodged somewhere in my throat. Every minute felt like an hour. Time moved like molasses. I kept picturing her at that dining table, picturing my mom's sharp voice that I knew so well, the same voice I'd grown up with, and it made my stomach twist into painful knots. I checked my watch constantly, counting down the minutes until I could pick her up and bring her home. When I finally got home that evening and put my daughter to bed, I sat down at my laptop with shaking hands. I almost dropped it twice trying to log into the camera feed. I didn't know what I was going to see. A part of me hoped desperately that I was wrong, that I'd see nothing concerning, that this would all turn out to be some strange misunderstanding. A part of me begged the universe for that outcome. But another part of me, the part that knew my mother best, knew I wasn't wrong. That part knew exactly what I was about to witness. I pressed play on the video file, and there it was, clear as day. My daughter sitting at the table with a small plate in front of her. My mother sitting across from her, posture rigid and stiff, expression hard and cold in a way I recognized from my own childhood. I could hear her voice through the audio, cold, sharp, cutting like a knife. My daughter sat there completely still, frozen like a small animal hoping a predator won't notice it, staring at the food on her plate. I could see the way her small shoulders curled inward, the way she tried to make herself smaller and smaller, as if disappearing might save her from what was happening. I didn't need to hear every single word to know what was happening. I could see it written clearly in my daughter's body language, in every tense muscle and fearful glance. I could hear my mother's clipped commands, her scolding tone, her relentless pushing. She wasn't hurting her physically. There was no hitting, no violence in the traditional sense. But she was doing something arguably worse. She was breaking her spirit, crushing her autonomy, turning something as innocent and necessary as food into a weapon of control and punishment. She was forcing her to eat beyond what she wanted. She was telling her she couldn't leave the table until every bite was gone. She was telling her she was bad for not wanting to eat, that she was wasteful and ungrateful. I could hear enough through the audio to understand it all too clearly, to see the full picture of what had happened. The specific words echoed through the speakers and pierced my heart. You will sit there until that plate is empty. I don't care if you're full. I don't care if you don't like it. Children who waste food are spoiled and ungrateful. Your mother has made you weak. You need to learn discipline. I watched as my daughter's eyes filled with tears that she was trying desperately not to let fall. I watched as my mother pushed the plate closer, her voice getting sharper and sharper. I watched the whole terrible scene unfold, unable to look away even though every second felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I slammed the laptop shut suddenly, unable to watch anymore. I sat there shaking violently, feeling like my chest had been split wide open. I couldn't breathe properly. My hands pressed against my face as tears spilled out faster than I could wipe them away, hot and angry. I had suspected it, yes. I had feared it. But seeing it, actually witnessing it, made everything inside me crumble into dust. I had let her go there. I had trusted my mother with my precious child. I had handed her over to someone who had once made me feel the exact same fear I now saw in my daughter's eyes. And now my daughter was paying the price for my blindness, for my willingness to believe that people change, that time softens everyone. That night, something fundamental in me hardened, like steel in a forge. Whatever guilt or hesitation I had before was completely gone, burned away. I wasn't going to let my child be hurt again. Not by anyone, not even by my own mother. I wasn't going to let her hide behind the idea of being just strict or old-fashioned or teaching discipline. What she did wasn't love. It wasn't parenting. It was control masquerading as care. It was cruelty dressed up as rules. And now that I knew the truth, saw it with my own eyes, there was no going back. I could never unsee what I'd witnessed. Now this is where I need your advice, where I need you to tell me if what I did next was right or wrong. I decided to confront my mother directly, not with questions or gentle inquiries, not with the fear of offending her that had held me back before, but with the truth I'd just witnessed. I wasn't going to let her twist the story or talk her way out of what she'd done. She had taken something pure and innocent in my daughter's life and turned it into fear and pain, and I was going to make absolutely sure she understood exactly what she'd done and what the consequences would be. The next day, I drove to her house alone. I felt cold inside, like all my warmth had been replaced with something harder, something unbreakable. She opened the door with her usual smile, the same one she'd used my whole life to smooth over everything, to make everything seem fine. But this time, I didn't see a loving grandmother standing there. I saw the woman who had made my little girl afraid to eat. I saw someone who had prioritized control over compassion, rules over relationship. I walked past her into the house without waiting for an invitation. My mother seemed surprised, but followed me into the living room, asking what was wrong, why I looked so upset. I turned to face her, and I'm sure she could see something different in my eyes, something she'd never seen before. I pulled out my phone and played the video for her without preamble, without explanation. Just pressed play and let her watch what she'd done. I watched her face as the video played. I watched for remorse, for shock, for horror at seeing herself through someone else's eyes. But what I saw instead was defensiveness. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes narrowed. When the video ended, she looked at me with something close to anger. "You put a camera in my house?" she said, her voice sharp with accusation, deflecting immediately. "That's what you're concerned about?" I replied, my voice shaking but steady. "Not what you did to her? Not how you terrorized a 7-year-old child? She bristled at that, straightening her spine. Terrorized? I was teaching her discipline. I was teaching her not to waste food, to be grateful for what she has. Something you clearly haven't taught her. You traumatized her, I said, my voice rising despite my attempts to stay calm. She won't eat any more. She's lost weight. She's terrified. You did that to her. My mother's face hardened even more, taking on that expression I knew so well from childhood. I did what needed to be done. Children need structure. They need to learn that they can't always get their way. You're too soft with her. You always have been. The words hung in the air between us like poison. Too soft. That's what she thought. That loving my daughter, respecting her boundaries, treating her like a person with feelings and autonomy, that was being too soft. You forced her to eat until she was sick, I said, my voice breaking. You sat there and made eating into torture for her. She's 7 years old, Mom. 7. And now she can't eat without being terrified. She'll get over it, my mother said, dismissively, waving her hand as if she were brushing away a minor inconvenience. Children are resilient. You're making too big a deal out of this, just like you always do. You're too emotional, too dramatic. That was when I realized something with perfect clarity. She didn't think she'd done anything wrong. She genuinely believed her actions were justified, that she'd been helping rather than hurting. Or maybe she just didn't care. Maybe the rules, her rules, mattered more to her than my daughter's well-being. You're never seeing her again, I said quietly, but with absolute certainty. My mother's face changed then, shock registering for the first time. What? You're never seeing my daughter again, I repeated, stronger this time. You hurt her. You broke her trust. You made her afraid of something as basic as eating. And you don't even care. You don't even see what you did wrong. You can't keep her from me, my mother said, her voice rising in both pitch and volume. I'm her grandmother. I have rights. You lost those rights when you decided control was more important than her well-being, I said, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. When you decided that finishing a plate of food was more important than her feeling safe. You did this, Mom. You did this to her, and you did this to us. The argument escalated from there, both of us saying things we probably couldn't take back. She accused me of being ungrateful, of turning my daughter against her, of being a bad mother who couldn't handle discipline. I told her exactly what I thought of her parenting style, both with me and with my daughter. I told her about the years of therapy I'd probably need to process my own childhood, about the memories that had come flooding back. I told her she wasn't the grandmother I thought she was, that maybe she'd never been. When I left her house that day, I knew our relationship would never be the same. I drove home with tears streaming down my face, feeling simultaneously liberated and devastated. I'd just cut my mother out of my life. I'd just ended a relationship that had defined me for my entire existence. But I'd also protected my daughter in the most important way I could. The weeks that followed were both better and worse than I'd anticipated. My daughter didn't improve overnight. Trauma doesn't work that way. But slowly, gradually, without the pressure of visits to Grandma's house hanging over her, she started to heal. It took months of therapy, of gentle encouragement, of creating new, positive associations with food. The therapist we found specialized in childhood trauma and was incredible with her, teaching her coping mechanisms and helping her process what had happened. My mother tried to contact me multiple times. Phone calls I didn't answer, text messages I deleted, a letter that arrived in the mail that I threw away without reading. She reached out to other family members, trying to paint me as the villain in this story, as an overprotective mother who was keeping her grandchild away for no reason. Some relatives believed her. Others, once I explained what had happened, understood and supported my decision. My husband and I went to couples therapy too. The stress of everything had nearly broken us, but we were both committed to working through it, to understanding each other better. He admitted he hadn't seen how serious things were, that he'd minimized my concerns because facing them would have meant facing some uncomfortable truths about his own mother and how she'd treated him growing up. It was a revelation for both of us. My daughter started eating again slowly at first, just small bites of food she chose herself. Then gradually more. Her weight began to stabilize, then increase to healthy levels. The light came back into her eyes in increments, like a sunrise happening over months instead of minutes. She started laughing again, playing again, being the child she was supposed to be, but she never asked about Grandma. Not once. And when I gently brought it up in therapy, making sure she knew it was okay to have feelings about what happened, she simply said, "I don't want to see her anymore. She was mean to me." That simple statement, delivered in such a matter-of-fact way, broke my heart all over again, but it also confirmed that I'd made the right choice. My daughter knew what was best for her. She knew who made her feel safe and who didn't. Looking back now, months later, I still struggle with complex feelings about the whole situation. Guilt for not seeing it sooner. Anger at my mother for what she did. Sadness for the relationship we'll never have. Relief that my daughter is healing. Pride that I chose her well-being over family peace. People ask me sometimes if I'll ever forgive my mother, if I'll ever let her back into our lives. The truth is, I don't know. Forgiveness is complicated. What she did caused real harm, and she's never apologized or acknowledged that harm. Until she does, if she ever does, I can't see a path forward. What I do know is this. I would make the same choice again in a heartbeat. Every single time. My daughter's safety and well-being will always, always come first, even when it costs me everything else. So I'm asking you now, as I process all of this, as I continue to navigate the aftermath, was I right? Should I have handled it differently? Should I have given my mother another chance? Should I have tried harder to repair the relationship? Or did I do exactly what any mother should do, protect her child at all costs, even when that cost is the relationship with her own mother? Please, I need to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments if you think I made the right choice, because this decision has shaped everything in my life since that day. It's defined who I am as a mother and who I'll continue to be. My mother's betrayal didn't just make my daughter stop eating. It forced me to choose between protecting my child and keeping my own mother in my life. And I chose my daughter. I will always choose my daughter. But some days, when I'm alone with my thoughts, I still wonder if there was another way. If I could have handled it better, if I'm the villain in someone else's version of this story. That's why I need you to tell me, was I right or wrong?